Welcome back to the 296th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including how Kamala Harris is the candidate of myth, how the other candidate on the other side is having some financial trouble with his company Truth Social, and an interesting article talking about a last-minute ballot measure that's being put through, or excuse me, a ballot change that's coming through in Michigan, and it actually could affect the election. And of course, we went today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, right now, we're seeing Kamala in a little bit of her honeymoon period. Some people are saying it's going to go away, some people say that it's going to last. Last time, I asked a specific question about Kamala Harris. Now we're going to do the election in general. Right now, as of whenever you're listening to this, what do you think the chances are of Kamala Harris winning versus Donald Trump? I've heard some people say it's going to be 60-40 in favor of Trump. Some people saying that it's 50-50. Some other people saying that it's 75-25 in favor of Kamala Harris. So I'd love to know what your guys' opinions are. I don't actually have one because I haven't gone through all of the polls and looked at all of the crosstabs and compared them to when Joe Biden was actually doing okay. So I'll let you guys decide. And with all that, let's jump into our first article that comes from Daily Signal. So the headline reads, Kamala Harris, candidate of myth. And I thought this was really interesting because there definitely is a palpable, how should I say, there's a feeling around Miss Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, that she is not necessarily infallible, but that she can be everything to everybody. I've heard this from multiple people because she's not really well defined yet. They haven't been able to really zone in on what issues they are going to pin on her. And what I mean by that are the issues that most Americans wouldn't actually be in favor of. They haven't found those key problems in her policies that they can identify and really exploit. And I mean the Republicans here when I say they. And this is something that they're obviously trying to do. It's the battle to define Kamala Harris right now. The left is defining her as someone who's in favor of freedom, especially zoning in or focusing in on the abortion issue. But the Republicans are trying to define her as someone who's actually weak on all policies. She's a flip-flopper, that she's only going to hold what is necessary to get in office, and then she's going to go back to her progressive roots, at least the ones that we saw in the 2020 campaign. And obviously the Kamala team is out there like, whoa, hey, no, don't make it about all that. At the end of the day, she renounces those. She's had time in the White House. She has had time sitting next to Mr. Biden, President Joe Biden. She's been able to see how he governs, and she has a more comprehensive understanding of how the country works and how she needs to be a president not only for one half of America, not just the people that are from California like she represented, but for all of the Americans. And it's all about ensuring the basic freedoms. Basically, most of her ads honestly sound like a conservative saying, hey, I want to limit how much the government is getting involved in your life. And I think that's actually a very, very good message for her part. Whether or not you like her, I think I have said this multiple times, the candidate who is going to be more involved in any person's life, the candidate who is going to be defined as an interventionist, the candidate who's going to be defined as the person getting into people's business, that is going to be the candidate that loses the most. The American culture is one of do not unjustly involve yourself in our lives. That's why we revolted against the British. They were taxing us without representation in their parliament, but also they were just simply telling us what to do too much. The taxation without representation was honestly more of a catchy slogan than the actual idea, which is you're not even here. How can you govern us efficiently? You're actually just telling us what to do. And we have always had this ethos for the most part. There's been some arguments, and we've had certain strands of progressivism, populism. Even some conservatives nowadays are saying, well, the government needs to be more involved, and not necessarily directly in your life, but at least trying to make your life better. And she's running on the opposite message. She's running on the smaller involvement message. And when I say message, that's really what it is, because at the end of the day, that's not probably what she's going to implement, just because we know her previous status as a person who is more than willing to involve the government in interfering in people's lives in order to get certain outcomes. She's all about, and she's talked about it multiple times, she believes in equity rather than equality. And equity is a noble goal, or at least it sounds like a noble goal. Because at the end of the day, the actual end goal of equity is to make sure that everybody ends up basically at the same spot. If you have a starting line and someone starts about 5 meters behind, the end goal is to give them a little bit of a boost, that person that starts a little bit behind, in order to finish in the same place as the other people, which does sound okay to some. It sounds actually pretty nice. Oh, hey, we're all going to end the same. But that doesn't necessarily take into account that there are natural advantages that certain people have, and we basically are going to have to negate those in order to make sure that everybody else is exactly the same. So if you look at the NBA, if the idea is that we bring everybody to the same level, either you're going to have to give that really short person some really bouncy shoes to be able to jump as high as the tall person or the best jumper. But if you can't necessarily implement something like that, which is hard to do, to just give out all these different resources to people who are disadvantaged, you're also going to have to put some sort of cap on the high end of things. So that's the government getting directly involved in people's lives, in theory, in order to restrict them from doing certain things because they have a natural advantage, or they're just better off, or they're just harder working, whatever it may be. But there's going to be an artificial cap in order to make sure that everybody ends up at that same place. So instead of having somebody who goes out and works those extra 25, 30 hours to get that extra bonus, they'll cap the amount of bonus that you can get and redistribute the rest of those earnings to someone else in the company. Or on a broader scale, when it comes to the tax system and it comes to the economic system within the United States, it would be very, very similar in that it would be a system that takes from the extremely wealthy, make sure that they can't make over $10 million a year, and the rest of it goes to the other part of the population that isn't necessarily doing so well. And that would be a direct way that you could actually implement an equity scheme. And guess what? That has a lot of government involvement in it. So even if she would say, well, in theory, I'm okay with equity, but I don't want to get too involved in people's lives, you're basically saying, okay, hey, I want this to happen, but I'm not actually going to enforce the means by which it's going to happen. So you're just not being practical, and you're just paying lip service to it, which means that you shouldn't vote for her if you want equity, because she's either really in favor of equity and then she's dispossessing the people who make the most or have the most advantages, or trying to limit the best among us, or she's doing the opposite, meaning that she's just paying lip service to it because she knows that it's not actually practicable to get involved in people's lives and restrict them to that degree, because she's also running on a message of freedom. So you can see here why some of her core ideas are actually antithetical to one another, and why she's running away from some of her old positions. So they're now in that battle, because if she's not going to live by any of those old positions, they're in the battle to define the modern Kamala Harris. And this is what the Daily Signal is talking about. How right now she's not necessarily well defined. It's kind of in between. It's all over the place. And I want to go through and read at least one or two paragraphs from this article so you can get an idea of what they are getting at. So, quote, not merely serviceable, a middle innings relief pitcher brought in when your starter suddenly implodes in the third inning. She is the Mariano Rivera of politics. She lights out. She's charismatic, fascinating, quick on her feet, charming. She is, in the words of legacy media, a historic candidate. Not just because she's a black woman, a fact that explains her lightning fast political ascent, but that only Democrats are allowed to mention, and only then in the context of explaining why America requires a black female president, but because she is apparently so good at this, which is obviously them being sarcastic. The legacy media, and even some of the new age media, have been trying to cast her as a changed candidate. Is that true? Is she actually a change candidate? Is she the most historic in the world? Um, to some degree, if she was to become president, yeah, she would be the first female black president. That is a huge game changer, but not really. Okay, so at least on the identity politics scale, sure, but I mean, are her policies going to be that much different than Joe Biden's? Are they going to be that much different than Obama's? Are they going to be that much different than XYZ politician, XYZ politician? It shouldn't come down to your characteristics. It should come down to what you're actually going to bring to the table. And I don't really think she's that revolutionary. I think most of her ideas actually fall within the mainstream, or at least within probably the inner 70% of the circle of the ideas of the Democratic Party as a whole. So, no, she's really not that revolutionary when it comes to the ideas. Now, does that mean that any of the ideas are good? No, doesn't mean that any of the ideas are good. I'm not saying they're bad either, but just because it falls within the mainstream of the party doesn't necessarily make them great ideas. But my point being that it also, you have to question, okay, so she's so revolutionary. This is such a big moment, and is it only because of what she looks like? Is it only because of the chromosomes that she was born with? Because at that rate, why wouldn't we just want to get any black woman president? Why does it have to be Kamala Harris? Oh, well, she meets the political moment, of course. So that's one thing. She's vice president, so it's convenient. But why is Kamala Harris so special if it's just about those certain characteristics? No, there should be something else along with it. There should be a certain charisma. I don't know if I necessarily see that. Her stump speeches, like I said during the meme episode, her stump speeches are getting a little bit better. They're probably, I would say, 20% better than the ones that she gave in 2020 before she dropped out of the primary. So she's obviously been working up on that area a little bit. She has a little bit more experience now. So I guess that is one thing that other people can't bring to the table. So there are these non-tangibles, but you have to run on those rather than the fact that she is a woman of color. And I'm not even saying that Kamala Harris is necessarily running on that, because guess what? She's trying to bring a coalition of every single different interest group in the Democratic Party together. I mean, you got your white men for Kamala, you got your white women for Kamala, or your Karens for Kamala, you got your African American women for Kamala. I think that's the name of the call that they had a few weeks ago. But my point being that she's actually stretching across the line. She's not just defining herself as a black woman. I mean, she is kind of leaning on heavy for the abortion issue to really put herself out there as a woman because it directly affects her on that one. So I guess in that case, but even then, another woman could run on that. So I don't think the intersectional issues are necessarily what she should be honing in on. And I think it's smart that for the most part, she's not just leaning on that crutch, even though abortion is definitely one of the number one issues on her radar. And for some of you, you may be saying, well, just because, abortion is one of her main crutches, that doesn't mean that it's a women's issue, because some women aren't for abortion, which is fair enough. I personally have interacted over the course of the last few years, people that are women who are also against abortion. But a majority of women don't like the idea of the government telling them what they can and can't do with their body. Even if they're for actually stopping abortion, they even have, at least with the language that's used, the political language that's used, it causes a little bit of hesitation. So running from that side, even though, like I said, she's making it a key issue, she's also not trying to just play identity politics. And I think everybody else is. I think that's what the media is doing. And I think it's actually going to be detrimental for her case when she can just run on some other things, especially when it comes to her legacy in the Joe Biden era, even though she hasn't done that much. And it's honestly not the most stellar record. That doesn't necessarily matter. She can say, hey, I was in there, I've been in the meetings, I've understood the geopolitics side of things a little bit more, because that's the main thing she really needed experience with, because a lot of her stuff has been domestic politics because she's been a senator and a DA. So I think that they're crafting a very specific message here. And I think the media, like this article is pointing out, is the one doing a lot of the heavy lifting here in order to try to reflect positively on her and bring up the historic nature. But I think that actually could end up hurting her, because people don't want the fact that she's a black woman just beaten over their head. They want to hear what she can do for them. And if Kamala Harris, the candidate, keeps going with that message rather than the one that the media is trying to spin, I think it actually could be good for her. And also, guess what? If she doesn't quite put herself in that box, then she could even, in theory, keep some of this mythic status as she puts a few more of her, freedom, keep the government out of your life message there. A lot of people can project whatever they want onto that sort of message. So if she plays it smart, she could keep this, I can be anybody, anything to anybody kind of message going. And that will be very, very interesting for sure. So let's turn to our other candidate in the race. This article comes from the New Republic, and the headline goes, Trump gets more terrible news, this time from Truth Social. So for those of you who don't remember, Truth Social is his company. It was bought by a holdings company, a holding company is actually what made it go live on the stock market under DJT. It soared up to a huge $72 after its initial offering, and now it's starting to come back down. So let's talk about its current evaluation, or at least one of the more recent ones. Quote, the company had a net loss of $58.2 million in 2023, numbers that had to be re-audited after its accounting firm was charged with massive fraud and subsequently barred from ever serving as accountants again. The company lost an astonishing $327.6 million last quarter, only bringing in $770,000 in revenue, which is absolutely insane. So let's talk about share prices. Quote, Trump Tech Media and Technology, the parent company of Truth Social, had experienced a jump in its stock price as of, uh, to $46 per share after the gunman tried to kill Trump earlier this month. But those gains appear to have been short-lived as the stock dropped to about 29 per share on Wednesday. And then it also mentions the high of 72. So it's been a little bit volatile. Then again, with any public offering, normally as the shares start to go on the market for the first time and the banks and everybody who had backed it, who got like the premium shares, the good rates for the shares, they start selling them. Of course, the price is going to go up. So we know it's going to get jacked up and over time it's going to come back down. We've seen this with a lot of different public offerings. And it looked like there was maybe a little tiny bit of hope after Trump survived and the base was coming behind him and they really thought he was going to win. But now, guess what? It looks like Kamala Harris, and let's be clear, this stock has been overjuiced for quite some time. But now that Kamala Harris is actually on the ticket, Joe Biden's out, his chances of winning kind of come back to more of a 50-50 or at least a toss-up like it was beforehand. Now, the people that are investors are saying, oh, I don't know. Because if he does get into office and he continues to just use Truth Social, which would be hilarious, not using the official POTUS Twitter account, but he uses the official POTUS Truth Social account, then it'll be hilarious because most of the media will have to go into Truth Social. They'll have to pay for Truth Social or at least see some of the ads there and give him a little bit of money in order to actually see what he's putting out there. So will everybody else who actually adores him, which, I mean, basically all of them already are on Truth Social. But even the normies may get onto Truth Social so that they can see what he's putting out there. It just raises his reputation. Then again, he won't actually be able to benefit. And that's what the authors are talking about here, that his cash cow is kind of hurting now that the stock price is going down. But he wouldn't be able to benefit from it anyway if he was to be president and the stock price was going to continue going up because everybody has to use it. So it's kind of an essential, at least for 4 years. He's not even going to benefit from it because he would have to divest from it. He owns about 60% now, so he would have to sign it off to somebody else so that nobody could, China or Saudi Arabia, Israel, UK, any of our friendly nations or enemy nations couldn't buy ads on the platform and therefore provide him with money and therefore bias any of the decisions that he would be making while he is president. Now, we know that things have been a little bit different in the past. Some of his resorts have hosted dignitaries for different trips or at least have been posed as options for it. So we know there's a little bit of a history of some, I don't want to say insider trading, but some less than perfect relations to, and let's be clear, technically he didn't have a stake in those companies at that point, but they were still ones that, I mean, at the end of the day, even if you signed them over, in the future you can probably get them signed back to you. So there's definitely some questionable things when it comes to that for sure. But the author's not even trying to think that far ahead. They're looking at it now and they're just saying, yeah, this is not a good one for Mr. Trump. Quote, while at the National Association of Black Journalists conference in Chicago, Trump was asked if he would pardon rioters who assaulted police officers during the January 6th insurrection. Quote, oh, absolutely I would, Trump replied, while interrupting the moderators. If they are innocent, I would pardon them. And then if they've been, quote, if they've been convicted, Rachel Scott, senior congressional correspondent from ABC, quickly clarified, to which the crowd interrupted in laughter. Yikes, this is which is, gosh. So there's a few different tweets here. I'm actually going to just move past them. Quote, Trump previously has called the violent insurrectionists hostages unbelievable patriots and has promised several times over and over again to free the rioters. And the reason the author's putting this in here is because he's done it on Truth Social. But guess what? The moderates don't necessarily know about that. They maybe have had the mainstream media come out and say things, but a lot of this sort of coverage is on Truth Social. So if they want anything like this, they want any of his hot takes in the future, then they'll probably have to download Truth Social in order to see what the president is saying. Now, I honestly, and I want to take another step back because this is at this point we've kind of gone down the random path, but I wonder if Trump refuses to use the official POTUS Twitter account, could someone sue and say that he's actually limiting the access of people because he's not putting it out on Twitter, even if he's just putting it on True Social? Just like is he allowed to block people because he's the president kind of question before that went to the Supreme Court? I think that would be very, very interesting for sure. And I'd be very curious to see where that situation goes. And if people are like, oh, no, 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 you can't do it on your own platform, or at least one that you had a stake in. You can't force everybody to go use this platform. You have to put it out there to everybody. And honestly, wouldn't be surprised if Elon Musk came in and said, we're actually going to do a platform sharing kind of thing because he wants to make the everything app. We're going to make an open source app where everybody can access everything, and Twitter will still be a main platform, but they could even bring in things from Mastodon, Facebook, all into one location. So technically it would be on the X app, but it wouldn't be posted to the infrastructure or the UI of the previous Twitter. I think that could be very, very interesting. I don't know if there's any developers out there who listen to this are like, whoa, no, no, that's freaking crazy. The Everything app where all the social media, because I think Jack Dorsey also had this idea, where all the social media basically goes to one website and you filter all of them through. They basically would be like RSS feeds that operate outside of this website, and then the website would aggregate all of them, so you couldn't really ban anybody from any, or at least this website, you couldn't ban anybody because at the end of the day, the information and the data is coming from somewhere else, and they're just kind of tapping into it. There's a few different things there that I didn't quite understand at the time, but I think it would be interesting if Elon could do something like that, where they could actually plug in the Truth Social feed where it says this is a post from Truth Social, so that Trump could still get his message out on the platform, but it would still be through his own company. And then they might have to do like a revenue sharing or split for the things for the money, because they're doing really heavy analytics now. So they could probably tell how many people actually viewed ads from the Truth Social aspect that was being plugged in to the Twitter UI. It'd be interesting for sure. I want to see what would be happening there in the future. But right now, it's looking quite hard for Mr. Donald Trump. He is going through a tough general election now. It was going to be an easy one. Now it's a tough one. The J.D. Vance is getting lambasted left, right, and center, and now some of his companies are not necessarily doing so good. So he's sitting there like, okay, I really got to win this thing, because the prosecutions, even though some of them haven't been dismissed at this point, some of them are still going forward. We'll see if the Fulton County one has any new revelations before Election Day. I'm assuming there's going to be one somewhere around the end of September, maybe the beginning of October. Oh, wait, the October surprise? No, they wouldn't do anything in October. I swear, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are both going through their files like, okay, what is the best October surprise? Because we've already had a crazy year. So what can honestly top it? They better be some really crazy stories. And I don't hope for October surprises because they just make things overly hectic. But guess what? Alex doesn't get his way, because Alex is not the political operatives on both sides. So they're going to do whatever they want to do. And at the end of the day, I hope it's a really good October surprise. And I hope we can end the year, the election season, with an absolute amazing story going through it. And that everything can be counted on the first night, so we have all of it done. Nope, that is also going to be idiotic. It's going to take at least a week, if not a little bit longer, to count, which I don't know. We were able to do it in the past, so why can't we do it now? That one frustrates me a lot. But hey, that's all to be decided in the future. But this next story does have to do with election night, and that's why I was trying to segue into it a little bit here. This one comes from Just the News, and it reads, quote, Michigan Secretary of State announces panic button for poll workers ahead of elections. And Michigan's pretty blue state, so you may be thinking, what? Panic button? What is this going to be? I'm just going to read two of the paragraphs here from the article, because they can describe it better than I can, and then we'll go into a little bit of commentary on it. Quote, Michigan Democratic Secretary of State Jacqueline Benson this week announced that the state would implement a panic button system for the November election, permitting election officials to quickly alert law enforcement in the event of a threat. So, okay, what does this threat mean? What is going on here? Quote, I don't believe this is announced yet, but will be rolling out a panic button type of communication for every election worker if clerks work with us to implement it in their particular voting location to be able to text if something occurs. Once again, they don't really talk about what this something is. Quote, we've done a number of scenario planning exercises with clerks all around the state, with just about every clerk from Traverse City and Marquette to Detroit and Grand Rapids and Flint, there where we have brought law enforcement, first responders, and clerks together to help go through different scenarios, tabletop exercises, so that we know and that they know who to call, what to do if someone does show up armed and dangerous. So what they're thinking here is that there's going to be someone coming in trying to threaten the election workers, that they're going to try to disrupt the process. And I honestly find this absolutely terrifying that they believe things are getting to the point where this could actually happen. I also think it is probably a bit of an overreaction. I don't want anybody to not be prepared. So at the end of the day, if I'm going to err on the side of caution that maybe these things are okay, I think my taxpayer dollars doesn't necessarily need to go to them, because I don't think anybody's going to do that. Also, you don't actually have to have law enforcement. Guess what? Have one person every ballot location, if you can, have a poll watcher who has a firearm of their own who could protect the group if they so chose. Or maybe you just have private security on the location, because maybe you should have security there anyway in case anything goes on, anything crazy, any person comes in just angry in general, not necessarily coming to disturb anything, but just comes in angry and gets frustrated during the voting process. I don't see why you shouldn't have somebody who's there as security anyway, but that's also more state dollars and tax funds going to it. So maybe you just have an armed citizen, or you even have, if it's an election worker who's a woman or a man, you have their significant other come in. And if they're comfortable with having a gun, you have them volunteer for certain hours and you keep on rotating it. Michigan, even though some areas are more urbanized than others, there are still lots of rural areas where you could probably find gun owners who would be willing to come in and protect the polling locations. And by protect, I don't mean they sit there with their ARs or their shotguns out front, but they have a concealed carry or even just a normal hip carry with their pistol, and they show it to everybody. And when I show it, I don't mean like they're out there flashing it, but at least it's on their hip, it's visible, so that people who maybe think about doing something stupid are going to second guess themselves and say, no, maybe not, maybe not. No, I don't actually need to do something like that. Maybe that's a possibility. I would be very, very interested to see if something like that could be done in the future, because at the end of the day, I don't want anybody to get hurt by political violence. I don't want anything to happen to any of our poll watchers or workers, because they are very diligent people who believe in the process of democracy, at least enough to go out there and spend their time, effort, blood, sweat, and tears in order to make sure that our elections, if we can do it right, get counted on time. So I really, really hope that everything works out very, very well on that. So watch for this little panic button. I guess that's what they're calling it, the panic button law. Watch out for it. See if other states start to implement it. And maybe it's something that actually works out. I hope it's, like I said, not needed, but maybe it's actually a really good policy just in case anything happens. Because even reviewing what is going on, because we know that some pipes have burst at locations before and people may have to move the operation, or they may need to call emergency services. So actually running through these things may not be the end of the world. And especially if it's like a volunteer fire force and fire department, and they really want to be able to be prepared and they want to train some people on it, hey, you know what? Maybe it is a good use of dollars, in that tax dollars, in that case. You have fun paying for it in Michigan. We'll see if Virginia implements something like it here in the future. So let's jump into our final article. It's our Daily Delight, and this one comes from USA Today. Adorable bear cubs spotted having fun on a backyard playset. And honestly, these two guys are coming in, and it's one that it's kind of like a slack line that's been set up between some trees. So this is the fun type of backyard playset, in my opinion. It also makes sense why the bears are here. It's in a rural area, but these guys, they go through, they're kind of goofing around with it. It's a 30-second video, and if you want to leave this article, you want to go into the description, you want to find it, it's underneath that like and subscribe button. All the links are down there. You can find this video, and you can leave with a little bit of a smile on your face. Please do that. Also, if you want to read any of today's other articles, like I just said, all of it is in the description below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the link to the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast is dead. Disregard that, but you can find it on Podvine, as well as down there in the description, you can find the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And also sometimes I'll repost old ones if I think they're relevant or just interesting. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.